I wanted to hear a bit more about your thoughts
Modi
of the
and Trump.
bilateral relationship of Modi to Trump, but also the role of tariffs, because Trump wants to introduce reciprocal tariffs, and 75% of US exports to India are subject to 5%, I think, as it stands at the moment. So, how could you see these things
Average.
playing out?
They both face the same State Department, the same USAID, the same National Endowment of Democracy, the same National Democratic Institute, the same media monster. See the narratives that were doled out during the elections. Modi was, this is the last election, there will be no constitution, he's an autocrat, and he's a Hindu nationalist fascist. Trump, this is the last election, there won't be any constitution, he's an autocrat, and he's a Christian nationalist fascist. There's no difference. They just changed the word Hindu and Christian. There has been back-end conversations between Modi and Trump where you can see a lot of Indian stuff has started coming out, where he's got a little more power to actually hit back. And as Trump takes on his enemies, the same enemies that India has, well, it's a win-win for both of us.
This is the Global Gambit.
How are you going, everybody? So, in early February, we had a flurry of visits to Washington, D.C., as heads of state, governments all seeked to engage, shall we use as a broad term, the new Trump administration. It was obviously a time when Trump was making provocative comments around Gaza, but he was also seeking to make, should we say, connections around other parts of the world. And somewhere that will be incredibly important in the next 5 years is India. Now, many people on this show know I'm a big fan of India. I cover it a lot. And someone who I'm delighted to finally host, we've been trying to schedule this for a while, is Aadi of Dev Talks, a notable YouTube channel that does commentary and analysis on Indian affairs, India's place in the world, and I think does a very important job of ensuring that things aren't dominated by a Western narrative or any specific narrative. And I'm delighted to have you on, Aadi. Thank you very much for joining the show.
Thank you.
I guess my first question for you is, what did you think of Modi's visit to the White House? Because I didn't actually expect it to be so soon. And it looked like it was a very constructive meeting.
I did expect it to happen pretty soon because Modi was one of the first people Donald Trump spoke to right after his winning the election. So, and both of them have a very old relationship. So I didn't see anything out of the blue as far as this thing is concerned. Trump's policy would be to engage the big four of the world, big three of the world, apart from himself, would be his policy to engage with Putin, which he's doing, with Xi Jinping, which he's done, and Modi, which he's doing. These three people would be the ones, and I personally foresee a big four sort of a conference taking place sometime in the future on the lines of Yalta in 1945. Because the New World Order has to set in the way the pragmatic powers in the world look at it.
Mm.
And when I refer to the pragmatic powers, it is basically the new world powers which are coming up. The old world powers like Europe is pretty much done with. I think with last week's events around Ukraine, Europe will find itself being powerless, voiceless pretty soon. Uh, there is going to be leadership changes in Europe, which are going to be quite shocking. Um, and Europe is going to go through its own turmoil because it doesn't have the power to yield it anymore. And there is more controlled by the new world as per se, and more done by the new world as per se than these powers. And Trump recognizes that. So if you see his engagement, it's focusing on towards that. Now India is in an interesting position because we have a hand in Russia, Ukraine. We have our hand in the Middle East as well. And apart from that, you also have the China factor, which is playing out in the Indian Ocean. So there's a lot of convergence as far as both the countries are concerned. I resonate what Trump actually said about the Biden administration and its treatment of India, which was, I think, very unfair. Um the same old freedom of this and that and the other, which spoiled relationships between both the countries to a point where I don't think the trust levels are there as much as it should be between India and US. And it was at a bad state. So Trump coming in, some sort of changes do seem likely, but let me be very clear: in India, the policy is going to be more pragmatic. It's going to be more, uh, you know, test, trust, test, trust, that sort of a thing.
So
Because India has its own ways of doing things. So
no, I think that's very an important point. My thematic focus is great power politics, and I think it's pretty clear that we're back in a world where bigger powers
yeah,
do influence more smaller powers. The notable thing, though, and you sort of touched upon it, but I'd like you to elaborate on it, which is that, and I'm glad actually on that you include India in the big three, right? Because I think India, when we talk about sort of nuclear weapons, or India's not really in the China, Russia, and the US, and it's like, well, of course it should be. It's the most populous country, and is going
yeah.
to be the third largest economy quite soon. So I'm glad that you incorporate it there. But the distinction that I'd like you to elaborate on is the Indo-US relationship, because it is very different to China. It's very different to Russia. It's less combative. It's not an alliance. We know that India likes its strategic autonomy, but it's based on mutual interests, and there are opportunities here for more collaboration in like tech and science and things like that. So how do you look at the potential US-Indo relationship vis-a-vis US relations with the other two?
Let me comment on the nuclear powers, as you said, first. And today, the judge of any country is not going to be his military strength. It's just not going to be there. If there are two wars that have taught us anything, military strength can only get you to a certain point. Russia has a huge power with a huge military. They've not been able to do what they planned to do. They are winning the war, that's fine, but they couldn't. And the same is with Israel. A huge military power, the greatest, intelligence force in the world, and they face challenges in Lebanon. They face challenges in Gaza. We see that with the way that the Hamas literally positioned themselves at the return of the hostages. That was very clear that you can break a population down, but defeating them is a totally different story. So the comprehensive defeats that we saw in the Second World War are a thing of the past, right? So it's going to be the comprehensive national power of a country, which will include its demography, its economy, its military, its nuclear forces, its trade routes, its diplomacy, the people itself. And people, when I mean, it's not just the numbers, it's also the skill quality and the quality of people that you're talking about. Perceptions. These are things that are going to be the judges of the future. Previously, we used to hold by a paradigm where it was economy and military. It was a very narrow-ended paradigm, but tomorrow it's going to change. It's going to be about resources. It's going to be about a more comprehensive style wherein inclusion would be the key, because the last world order, we saw that it was not inclusive, and that's where the world order has kind of taken a hit, and people are refusing to abide by it because the rules-based international order that the Americans put in place was not fair. Right? It's not fair to the global south. It's not fair to large countries which are excluded off the big table. And of course, India could not ask for a place when it wasn't even there yet. But today we have come to a point where that demand could be actually put across, and that's what we've been doing for the past year and a half. That you call us this, call us that. Everybody supports our inclusion in the Security Council, but we're still not there. So it has to be a more inclusive world. And here, see, India is in a very unique position. One, it's a growing power, right? It's got the right things going for itself within the country as far as economic progress is concerned. And we've shown it even during COVID. We've shown fantastic progress even during the Russia-Ukraine war, where the rest of the world basically took a beat. We were growing at 7-8%. We still are. 1 quarter here and there, up and down, doesn't make much of a difference. But the overall growth percentage of India is highest in the world today.
Mm-hmm.
If you see what the World Bank and the IMF say, that the future of the world economy will be based on how India actually works. Because that's the only part that is giving some amount of growth. So it will be based on that. China is in a massive slowdown right now. There's been a 99% decrease in terms of the FDI going into China over the past quarter. 99%. Now, that's like nothing coming inside the country. So there is a trust factor. India is trusted around the place. So it's going to be a lot of intangibles rather than just the pure, simple tangibles of economic power and military might. Today, no country can actually showcase the military might that it could in 1945. Even the Americans can't. They don't have the kind of forces for it. So what America would need is a multi-alignment rather than alliances. Because alliances, as per se, if you see what the Americans themselves are doing to Europe, which tells you that alliances, the days of alliances are over. It is going to be alignment, where powers meet up in the middle on common interests and common threats and common perceptions to cooperate and coordinate with each other in a particular theater for a particular purpose, rather than a blind signing of an agreement where everybody's what's are tied together. So I foresee a more loosely aligned world, and which falls straight into India's lap. India's kept its relationship with the US alive in spite of Biden's administration, and it's also kept its relationship with Russia going pretty well. Apart from that, we have our issues with China, but we deal with them on our own. We have our regional issues, which we deal with them on our own. We have our own trade corridors coming across. So we are in a unique position, and geography itself, if you look at a map and the way India is positioned in the world, geography makes a huge difference. You can't do anything in the Indo-Pacific without India being there. It's just not possible. The
No.
largest amount of water is around India. And traditionally, since civilization is known, India has, traded in these waters and fought in these waters and stuff like that. So it's a historical context. It's a civilizational power. So that's what makes a difference.
Yeah,
What
I
we
think. No, go ahead.
what we're going to see, as I was saying, is a multi-aligned world, right? Where it won't be straight alignment. You will have loosely, joint up powers. I won't be surprised if there's a strategic partnership between India, Russia, and US. I won't be surprised with these kind of things, going forward, because the world is going to change. The perceptions and the priorities are going to change. For Trump, one of the biggest things would be, if he wants to isolate China, is to remove all Chinese connections. And you see that happening. One of the advisors to Trump clearly said that we would want to reduce the Russia-China relationship. And they've actually made a huge crack in it right now itself with the position in Gaza. We know the Chinese were supporting the Hamas. We know the Chinese were supporting the Houthis. They were supplying drones to them. We know Chinese scientists and technicians and construction workers actually constructed the tunnels in Hamas. We know the pipes where the rockets were made are made in China. So there's a lot of Chinese connection. And what is happening is,
What I would just interject on that point, though, because I'm kind of curious. I mean, I want to break down India's bilateral relations with each country more, because I think it's quite important. But yeah, the word you're thinking of, or there is a word that I came across relatively recently, which I think is quite interesting, is multiplex. Not even multipolar, but multiplex. So it's a little bit more fluid. And I agree with you. I love the aligned word, because I think it's, the US is aligned more to democracy, but it doesn't necessarily mean it follows it all the time, because it's quite hypocritical.
So it's going to be more loose. The structure is going to be
agree.
more loose than the rigid structures of the past.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think India is in that unique position because Modi has done an effective job of, and this is the question I wanted to ask you, which was more about sort of the global south, the non-aligned countries, or the countries that aren't aligned to these two supposed poles of China-led and Russia and US-led and this sort of thing, which, as we're talking about, maybe not quite so binary anymore. But how do you see India as the sort of de facto leader of countries that don't want to be all in bed with the United States, but all in bed with the Chinese and the Russians? They try to play both sides and have a relationship with everybody. How do you think that fares? Because in the past,
look at any country which is there in the global south. Let's look at it for a moment. When it looks outside to look at somebody's model, right? You always study, okay, how has this country done this? There are 3, 4 models, 3, 4, 5, 6 models it'll see to study. One is the American model, right? Second is the Russian model. Third would be the Chinese model. Fourth will be the models of the European powers, which are now in decline. European and Japanese, I'll kind of combine them into a Western-led order sort of a thing. And then there will be the Indian model, which is independent of all of them. All these models are interconnected somewhere. And the Indian model shows you that you can grow without being an aided power. Now, one of the biggest things we must understand except Russia for that matter, is the rest of the powers are all aided growth powers. The Americans aided the growth of Europe, the Marshall Plan. The Americans aided the growth of Japan. They literally
Mm.
own the damn thing. The Americans aided the growth of even China by bringing it back into the WTO and everything like that. And the kind of technology transfer that was done and the kind of preferential treatment that was given to China, it was an aided growth.
Mhm.
India did not have that. So today, wherever we are, it's an independent model. So tell me, as a global South country, when you look at these models,
Yeah, no, I think it's a good point, and I think it's the autonomy thing, and I mean I hope that Europe is going to step up and respond to Ukraine and take more ownership. I think there is still an opportunity for the Europeans to be a collective pole, but as they currently stand in their inaction, in their entitlement or complacency, as we've seen for many years over not just Ukraine, but generally their relationship, over dependency on America's security, over dependency on China, big markets, on Russian cheap energy. It's made Europe quite lazy. And one hopes that this will be a kick in the arse to get them up. But India, as you say, has not had quite that sort of same dependency. But before we go further out again, I wanted to just ask you a little bit more about Trump and Modi. All right, and we're back because, well, nothing's changed. I don't have a light on suddenly, but some technical issues. But anyway, so Aadi, I wanted to hear a bit more about your thoughts
Modi
of the
and Trump.
bilateral relationship of Modi to Trump, but also the role of tariffs, because Trump wants to introduce reciprocal tariffs, and 75% of US exports to India are subject to 5%, I think, as it stands at the moment. So how could you see these things playing out in the short term?
They both face the same State Department, the same USAID, the same National Endowment of Democracy, the same National Democratic Institute, the same media monster. See the narratives that were doled out during the elections. Modi was, this is the last election, there will be no constitution. He's an autocrat and he's a Hindu nationalist fascist. Fair enough. Trump, this is the last election, there won't be any constitution. He's an autocrat and he's a Christian nationalist fascist. There's no difference. It was the same thing. They just changed the word Hindu and Christian. So there is an alignment between both of them because they both are sick of this damn thing. And there is a you can see the alignment by the way that things are coming out. There has been back-end conversations between Modi and Trump where you can see a lot of Indian stuff has started coming out where he's got a little more power to actually hit back. And as Trump takes on his enemies, the same enemies that India has, well, it's a win-win for both of us. So there is a alignment, which is a personal alignment between both the leaders that, you know what, we've been attacked personally. Let's get these guys. So there is that. There is obviously the strategic alignment. But then tariffs come into play. India is a protective market. Why? Because India has a large population. We need to protect our industry. Due to certain political parties basically selling us out to the Chinese in 2008, we lost our industry. You know, we used to be the largest pharma API producers in the world. Today, we import 65% of our APIs, and we're supposed to be the pharma market of the world. Bull. You know, so that whole thing needs to be taken back. And today, it's on the process of being taken back. Manufacturing takes time for it to be established. We had a huge manufacturing industry which just got shut down because we allowed the Chinese to come inside and literally rape our markets. Today, we are one of the largest producers of toys in the world. 5-6 years back, it wasn't the case. We are one of the largest importers of toys. We showed the same resilience during COVID. We were the world's largest importer of masks and PPEs. Within 6 months of the lockdown, we were the second largest exporter in the world. So India got its act together and realized, okay, this is something that we need to do, and we did it. People didn't think, you see the kind of reporting that was done about vaccines. Oh, India will take, 120 years to vaccinate itself. We were one of the first people in the world. We vaccinated 100 million people in a day. You know, that's more than populations of countries. And we showed the world that, listen, this country is capable. So that's why everybody started looking at India and saying, hey, whoa, what are these guys doing? Before that, nobody spoke about it. And if you look at both the leaders today, they have a certain alignment because of one, the system, both in both the countries are pretty much same in terms of the democracy, in terms of the noisy democracy that both the countries have, in terms of foreign interference, in terms of all that stuff. The challenges both the leaders face are pretty much the same.
So, what of then the change in the government in last year? Because Modi did see a setback. I don't think there's
Yeah,
any
well,
difference in what happened with the
when you
BJP.
look at it from like 30,000 feet away, barely a setback is. If you look at, I think it was a good setback. It needs to happen to people who are there continuously in power. And he's a popular leader. There's, people call that a setback. After that, there have been 5 elections. He's won 4 of them with supreme mandates in the states. These were critical elections. One of the largest states was Maharashtra, where, this was critical. He won them hands down. To a point, he got what? 67 or 70% of the seats. 203 out of a 270 assembly, and that was huge. That's a huge win. The same thing in the national capital, Delhi, where Modi or the BJP had no contact with the past 25 years. They hate it and they got it. So see, you can call it a setback. I look at it as a wake-up call, which these guys went through. And they said, okay, fair enough. We got to step up our game because we had a lot of interference in terms of elections, which is coming out right now. If anybody believes that only $21 million was sent to India to increase the voter turnout, well, 2 things. 1, it's too small. The amounts are just too small. 2, voter turnout dropped by 4%. So what were you doing? The amount of money that came into India to influence the election was about $12 billion in total. Right? It came through crypto.
To influence it in the direction of what, the Congress Party in a more
The idea of the powers that be was to keep Modi away from power or as a beacon prime minister with a minority government. Today, he does not have a minority government. He has a majority government. He has a majority alliance where he's sitting at 300 seats, where the marker is about 272. So he's comfortably through. There's no problem. See, this is also the propaganda that came across. But we as nationalists, we know he took a hit. Fair enough. But the guy is smart enough to dust himself off, stand up and fight back. And he did. And he won the elections. So today, the whole thing that, Modi took a setback, that's gone. Because the way he's won the rest of the elections, everybody says, the BJP voting machine is back. The BJP election machine is back. And these guys are an election machine. They know how to win it. They know how to kind of play the game. They know how to play the reach. They've got the workers on the ground. They've got thousands and thousands of people who go around door to door, make people vote and stuff like that. It's like, it's a whole campaign that happens, which didn't happen in the 2024 election, honestly. It didn't. There was overconfidence. If it would have, trust you me, the scores would have been different. And they showcased that we could do that. So the country is like, okay, fine, fair enough. There was a setback, and that's okay. Everybody's back to square one. And the kind of reforms that he's taken up in the past 6 months, which, honestly, nationalists in India didn't think they would ever happen. We never thought we would see these kind of reforms, especially in terms of societal reforms, land ownership and this and that, which was, it was a demand. We never thought it will take place because it will create massive social issues within the country. He took them up. And as a matter of fact, it's in the parliament now. By the 10th or the 15th of March, one of the biggest land ownership reforms in India would happen.
So let me ask you a question on this. And I know your audience will be reactive to this, but I think it's important to do so. The goal of my show and my questioning is not to remain in comfort zones. From a Western perspective, and this isn't necessarily what I agree with either, I try to be neutral, which is the West criticizes Modi for being undemocratic or unfair to minorities, right? You know where I'm going with this about the treatment of minority groups in the country. So when you hear those sorts of accusations, 1, how do you feel? But 2, also, why are they so inaccurate?
There are issues in every country. Let me say that very clearly. We are a 1.4 billion population. That's more than the population of America and Europe put together. There will be issues, there will be fights. People will disagree with each other, especially religions like Islam when it's there in the middle. Well, there's going to be disagreements. there's going to be massive disagreements, which is what we are seeing in Europe and America. See states like Michigan, what kind of arguments come out of Michigan are completely different from what comes out of,
No, that's a fair point.
let's say Nebraska. I mean, see the difference. You see what's coming out of Sweden, see what's coming out of England. Now, we've been talking about it for the past 10 years and saying this is a problem. We need to sort this out. And one of the biggest land reforms is connected to this. There's a act in India called the Waqf Act, wherein a mosque or a Waqf board could literally take up anything and say this is ours, and we had to fight back to say it's not yours. And it couldn't go to a court. It had to go to a committee which was basically owned by the Waqf itself. They lay claim to the parliament of this country. I mean, this was insane. This was insanity. And we basically saw this happening. So, when you look at this and when you look at the unfairness with the way the Brits actually left us with fault lines within our country, that needs to get resolved. So, yeah, certain lobbies are going to get burnt. Secondly, remember one thing, when you want to criticize someone, you're going to look at his fault lines. What are the biggest fault lines in India? There's huge divide as far as the languages are concerned. It's not a divide, but it's difference. And you can exploit it. So it's anything you want. And as I said, the globe today is being run by the leftist Islamist lobby. I call it the Sino-Wahhabi Leftist Alliance. A lot of people won't have
break
heard
that
of
down
this.
for me then. What is this left? Because, I might have some sympathies to certain leftist issues, right? I do believe climate change is an issue, but that doesn't make me an Islamist. So why do you put them together, and what does that mean, right? Explain it to me as an ignorant Englishman.
Yeah. When you look at it, what happened after the Second World War? The communists basically realized that we are not going to survive because of the way they were and the way they kind of managed their show.
Right.
They said we need to kind of clean up, we need to clear up, we need to put a different perspective. Otherwise, people are not going to accept us in the world.
Okay.
Right? So what did they do? They went to Harvard. They started infiltrating into these agencies. So they said, we'll control what? They'll control the society, they'll control the education, then they'll control the media. These are the ways that you can brainwash people. So the leftist takeover of the world literally started by about the 70s, where you saw the race riots in America and stuff like that. So there was a bit of a change in terms of thought process. Those race riots brought in certain individuals which said, okay, this is a good place that we can gain power. And all these basically situations of, the minorities are in trouble. So they would take up these causes. When you take up these causes and make a small victory, then you gain a certain amount of power. Now that you have the establishment, now let me explain something to you. In the 60s, in America, what was the biggest thing? Civil rights, right? The civil rights movement. Include the blacks into the thing and stuff like that. When that movement finished, the people who led that movement at the ground, they didn't have much to do. What did they switch to? Equality for women and feminism. They switched over, and there was the same people, same thing, same narrative of inequality and this and that. That whole thing went on till the 80s and the 90s and stuff like that. And now what have they picked up? Transgenderism, gender divide, caste. So the apparatus remains the same, and why they do this is basically because if you have fault lines and if you play a victim card with that fault line, that entire group comes behind you. What that gives you is a certain vote bank. And in a democracy, one of the biggest things needed is what? To get into damn power. And how do you get into power? Is by votes. So you secure a certain vote bank for yourself by giving them frivolous little, okay, you do one thing, you take this. This group is crying, okay, just call the leader, give him some money. Let him shut up. And he'll align his people behind us. And you see vote banks all over the place.
No, that's an interesting point, actually.
Right? So it's about keeping power. Now, how they basically decided with the Islamists is they realized, okay, here are people which, we can use. And they used them. Where? Where was Islamist, radical Islam used in this world? Afghanistan? Yes, no. Who created the Taliban? It was the Americans. Who created the whole radical movement in Syria? It was the Americans. Why? Because they wanted to hit back at Assad. That thing turned around, boomeranged, and became ISIS. That's a different story. And then you had to go fight it.
The same thing with the Taliban. They kept Pakistan in a position of idiosyncrasy so that they could use Pakistan to do their stupid things. They built up Islam there and said, fair enough, let it be, because people won't ask a question.
I think there's a bit more to the ISIS one. It came out of the divergence of branches in Al Qaeda, but the point is that Al Qaeda came out of them and her
Now,
jihadin.
if you read WikiLeaks, Jake Sullivan writing to Hillary Clinton, Al Qaeda in Syria is on our side. There are WikiLeaks emails. So what they did was they used this phenomenon to control, to have a vote bank. Exactly what Trudeau does in Canada. So this is the vote bank. You know, why there was the anti-woke movement in America, which literally won the game, is because the previous election was won by the wokes. That vote bank fired for Joe Biden. And then whatever you can say, okay, the election was stolen or not stolen, that's a different debate altogether. But that was a vote bank, and that's how you appease. In India, that's the same thing that is done. In Europe, the same thing is done. And Islamists love the factor that they need to give out a victim card. So there you go. Apart from that, the Americans have been using these guys left, right, and center to create trouble within India. Now we realize USAID was giving money to an organization called the Helping Hands Foundation in Michigan, which was giving money directly to the Lashkar-e-Taiba in Pakistan, which did the 2008 attacks in Mumbai. And people are shocked. Whoa, what is this? But yeah, and do you know when the last payment was made? November 2024.
I think that the USA thing is I have very conflicting feelings about it, having worked in that industry and area for a bit.
But they do a lot of good. Let me make myself very clear. They do a lot of good as well. But in the garb of the,
I think that's an important acknowledgement.
Yeah, they do. I'm not denying that fact. I'm sure they've done a lot of good. I'll give you an example of what good they do. Okay, a lot of people won't know this. But during the Vietnam War, there was something known as the Agent Orange that was used in Vietnam.
Okay.
You know about that?
Elaborate. Explain to me in the audience.
Agent Orange was basically a chemical that these aircraft, you can see enough videos of them online. Just type Agent Orange Vietnam. It was sprayed on these Vietnamese fields to basically kill every damn thing there. So they lost their ground. They couldn't grow anything. It was terrible. It was terrible. The kind of shit that was done there, it was absolutely terrible. So the USAID has a way to remove that soil and bring in fresh soil to kind of give the people there better lives in the future, because it caused cancer, it caused a whole lot of problems in that area. So USAID was doing a lot of good work in doing that damn thing, something that they spoiled themselves in war. So there's a lot of good. I'm not denying that fact. But in the garb of the good, a lot of nasty things were being done. You read their statements, and you read the way that the whole structure has been formed for the global media. You know, they trained 9,000 journalists around the world, out of which 7,500 were in India.
No, I agree. I think that I'll put it this way. So the thing about USAID, and I do want to shift towards the Indian relationship with other countries as well. But one of the things about USAID, I think I do agree with, is overemphasis on representation for representation's sake. I've lost opportunities because I'm a man and I'm white, and therefore, you need greater gender balance. You need greater, and it's like,
okay, if you don't mind.
No, go ahead.
Sorry interjecting you. Do you know why this was made, right? USAID?
No, tell me. Well, share what your thoughts are.
In 1975, when the church committee hearings happened, they basically opened up the entire the trash box of the CIA. And if you read the hearing, I've read the entire hearing and its minutes, it talks about all the dirty deeds that the CIA did, from assassination programs to MK Ultra to drugging prostitutes on the middle of the road to doing human experiments of medicines and this, that, and the other. All that thing came out, and they said, no, we can't do this anymore. Stop. CIA was literally told to stop. You're just information gathering from now on. Stop this nonsense. What happened in 1979? The Iranian Revolution. The Soviets went into Afghanistan. The Americans were sitting there twiddling their thumbs. They're like, what the happened? Why didn't we react to this? So when those questions were asked, the CIA head gave a letter to Ronald Reagan in 1983 that, you know what, we need to repurpose our foreign policy so that we are able to promote democracy.
Mm.
And that's when the formation of something called the National Endowment of Democracy happened in 1985.
Well, very
And
interesting.
USAID, if you read the name, it's not aid. It's Agency for International Development.
Mm.
It doesn't talk about giving aid to anybody.
Well, yeah,
International
but
development of what?
with the incense that you will adopt more American values and principles, and interests. Right? Yeah, of course, it's an agenda. But I'm gonna leave on that cliffhanger, everybody. We're gonna split this into two parts. So that's the end of part one. Come back and join us in part two.